This is a general question, but is there data? You talked about good marriages, and I guess one question would be, how do you measure good marriage? But is there data to support that even a bad marriage is better than no marriage at all? And part of the question is, I get from a fair number of young people that the chance of having a bad marriage is so bad that it's not worth taking the risk. To get a good marriage is not worth taking the risk of a bad marriage.
I'll offer a couple more in a second. One of the problems with that kind of good and bad dichotomy is it sounds like it's the 0-1. You either have it or you don't have it, or you have the other one, right? And it reminds me of the 2012 study I did on children growing up in different kinds of households. Got me in a ton of trouble at UT, but navigated that. But one of the things that we didn't talk much about in that entire process is that none of that study of family structure and who was in your household had anything to do with mother's and father's happiness, right? Marital and parental happiness was not a part of that. And still the distinctions in how your children turned out were profound. So I've always thought, and I think I wrote about it in First Things, forget the name of the title of it, but basically a broken shelter or how does it, like an unsightly house still provides shelter. And so, and one of the points I had in here that I didn't talk about, sort of things that we can do, is like help people strengthen, repair things that are going wrong in their marriage. Now, a lot of times they're not interested in that at all by the time it has become noted. But I'm a big fan of saying that, the subjective temperature of your marriage is not such a good thing to take all the time. And that I look at my own marriage, 30 years, met her at 18. We had a lot to learn, and we had some serious hurdles to overcome. Very glad I stuck with it, right? There was an early time when we weren't sure if it was going to happen, but I just am not. Two people who want to make it work can do so no matter what the problem is. They just have to want it bad enough and work at it. So I'm a skeptic on sort of like, oh, this is a terrible marriage. Again, marriage is something that one half of the pair can kill, right? So it could be killed against your will. It's happening in a very close family member right now against his will. It breaks my heart. But I tend not to think of these things as sort of a subjective, measurable good versus bad.
I see JP's hand up. So go ahead, JP.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and a very real concern that is often expressed. We did some research when we were starting off trying to understand why young people might avoid marriage or seek marriage. We did a project with an organization called the Right Brain People, and the emotional fear of avoiding the trauma of past family hurt or the horror stories that people hear and know about is very real. And so I think one of the practical ways that the church can do is to help folks know there's a lot of academic literature that has been developed, that's well-researched, shows that it's not a mystery how one can know and discern the right spouse and to enter into a marriage in a healthy way. The more that an individual know, the more agency that they have, and the better they are at discerning it. I have 3 teenagers, and I read to my teenagers a couple years ago the book How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk, and I told them it's far too late for your mother, but it's not too late for you. And so there's just some very practical things. And so it's why we talk with churches about the importance of ministry that teaches singles the skills of just of effective relationship discernment. And does the person make you a better version of yourself or a worse version of yourself? Are you closer to God as a result of this person, further from God as a result of this person. And then there's certain repetitive habits in people's lives seen over a period of time that you can discern. And so there are helpful specific things. And so just teaching those can really move the needle and removing the fear and giving people agency.
Thanks, JP. Did you? The only thing that I would add to these comments that are I think they're on the money is just to sort of stress the importance of people recognizing that the paradox of marital happiness for most people is that if you pursue it directly, you're not going to get it, right? If you want to be like in this happy, incredible marriage, that's going to reduce your odds of being happily married. By contrast, of trying to be a good spouse to your wife, to your husband, and a good father and mother to your kids, generally speaking, you're gonna enjoy a happy marriage, a satisfying life. So and it's the same thing too in terms of like folks who are kind of worried about, for instance, getting divorced, and so they might have a prenup, and it's a more kind of individualistic, I'm going to kind of hedge my bets here kind of approach to their marriage. And of course, not surprisingly, folks who have a prenup, are more likely to be thinking about divorce, and they're less happy in their marriages. So it's just one of those things where marriage is kind of an all-in institution. And if if you embrace that character, the all-in character, and you obviously make a good decision, apropos of, JP's point about not marrying a jerk, then, most of the time you'll be flourishing. But of course, everyone's been married, like many of us have for many years. We'll have days, weeks, months, even years when there can be, profound strain or disappointment. So I'm not kind of promising like, a rose-colored, model, but I'm just saying that in the main, most of the time, you're more likely to be flourishing when you kind of have this family first approach to married life.
You kind of brought up something. You said bad marriages. There's also issues within a marriage, and there's a couple that'll come to mind. Abuse, and that can be physical, emotional, mental, and there's also the issue of addictions, and especially drug, alcohol addictions. And when you're involved in a family, if it's just the couple, that's one issue. But when you start bringing children into that, you have to look at the effect on those addictions on the children, and or how that abuse is coming through. And I've experienced that twice, with sisters and stuff. And it's tough. It's really hard. But, as a mother, and if I'm worried about the children, it's not always the mother that is having to deal with it. Sometimes it's the father, and where they stand and how they're going to protect those children. So, it's hard to define what a bad marriage is and good. I look at my husband's parents and my own. Mom and dad were married 70, going on 76 years when my dad died at 95. And Joe's same thing. They were way up, probably close to 70 years. They didn't have what you would look at as perfect marriages. I mean, Joe and I looked at them and said, it's not what we want. There's a lot that they did that was wonderful, but there was a lot that we did not want to emulate. And so we had to look at that, and how do we as a couple change that within our own marriage? Would I call them great marriages? No, they were good marriages. They were committed to each other, and went through those ups and down times, but I didn't call them a bad marriage. They were just not what Joe and I wanted. So I don't know how to answer that, except that it depends on what that bad is and where it fits. But when it comes to children, I'm sorry, you have to protect those children. And if it's has anything to do with abuse or addictions and things like that, then we fight for those children.
Thank you. Others? Who's up next? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to play devil's advocate for a minute. So, Dr. Wilcox, you gave some suggestions, or practical suggestions for men, and I really liked them. But I can imagine either a child or an undergrad hypothetically saying, you want me to take college seriously and embrace a vocation, meaning I'm supposed to be called to do something really important in the workplace. And then you told me that the main problem is that people are focusing on their careers and education and money way too much. So which is it? And why didn't you give the same advice to women? And so what am I supposed to do with this? You seem to be telling me this is the means to this larger end.
Sure. That's a great question. So I think it comes to kind of, so there's a happy, medium here via media that I would be thinking about in terms of just young men today and teenage boys that, so for some of the both male and female students that I deal with at UVA, they're on the kind of uber successful track. They are extremely hardworking, very professionally oriented. And I think they're getting, as I'm saying, kind of like the Midas mindset often message, and they're kind of following that. But there is, another segment of the population, and we do see this especially among teenage males and young men who are just not very engaged with much of anything, not with their schooling, not with any hobbies, not with work when they're in their early 20s. And so it's sort of that group of young men, especially young males, that I'm trying to think about how do we kind of help them to realize and recognize that work is not obviously the only thing or everything, but it is an important part of a life well lived. And it also is important in terms of making you kind of develop a sense of self-confidence to become more attractive to the opposite sex and to become a good husband. So yeah, the subtle point is to kind of say, don't overplay work, don't overplay money. But for a lot of these younger men and teenage guys who are kind of coming up, to realize that they need to prepare for a world where they're going to be, if they're going to flourish, a husband and father. And even today in 2024, we see in my own research in the book is that married moms are happiest when they are married to a guy who is a good provider, who is employed full time, who they rate subjectively as a good provider. And so in terms of women's happiness in marriage and men's happiness in marriage, we don't see right now in my data, like a big difference between working wives and stay-at-home wives. But we do see a very large difference for couples in guys who are not employed full-time as husbands, and guys who are. So I'm just sort of saying, if you think about kind of the importance of full-time work for men as husbands, you gotta get and also as potential, prospects, marital and romantic prospects, and the fact that more than basically 1 in 5 men in their prime years are not working full-time today, record territory. We just need to think about ways to kind of get our teenage boys and young men, as I said, to kind of man up and be more intentional about their education, their self-development, and their job prospects, but not go in the direction of overplaying it with, and that's where the Midas mindset comes in. Does that respond to your concern? Yeah.
I understand there are numerous stressors on young married couples. Well, my question has to do with the effect of reducing those stressors, possibly by doing more pre and postnatal care, more child care centers, maybe time off for both parents after a birth to come together, to bond, to learn how to parent, but also to buy the time for them to maybe grow together. And I'm not familiar with any research on that, but you experts probably are.
I'll jump in a little bit. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of stressors out there, and I see it with our sons that are married. Many of them have gone into professions that are not the higher income professions. Even our older son, Tony, is a pediatrician, but he ended up going over to Africa for the first 15 years. I remember running into a mom and she was all excited. He's a doctor. And, where is he? And I said, he's actually working in Africa. Her comment was, he's not going to make a whole lot of money doing that. And I said, maybe he didn't go into medicine to make money. Anyway. And so, it's the stress is there. They're in education, which meant their wives have chosen to work too in order to make ends meet. And then it was the daycare situation is very expensive, and to get quality daycare is really a problem. So we need to work on that as a society, looking at how do we make it easier for couples to take time off. Joe never got time off. to come and stay home. I was fortunate to have a mother that came for every single one of them. And so we as a community need to reach out to each other. If you see a young mom that needs help, to reach out, whether it's in our churches, in our parishes, in our schools. And that goes not just for the young, for the old. We have, Mother Teresa tells us, our little reading today, it's not about poverty of having a house and food. It's about loneliness, and how many people, as was mentioned here, are lonely. So yeah, I think we have to reduce those stresses. And if we can, as the parents or friends in our community, and we see that, I couldn't have done it without friends and friends here. I had no family here in town. So without those people that say, Cathy, I'll come take care of the boys when you go pick up the others so you don't have to wake up the babies. Or I'm going to the doctors and someone says, I'll take care of the other kids while you take them into the pediatrician for that ear infection. It's being that support for each other. And then policy changes are critical.
Thank you. JP's hand is up.
Yeah. I love that answer. Just adding to it, right? With the decline of the extended family, right? It is so incumbent on the local church, right, to provide the kind of community and ongoing support where a couple not only as we prepare for marriage, but then after marriage, that wedding day, life can be lived in an authentic Christian community, because life happens, right? And I know my friends, Mary Rose and Ryan Verrett are there, who are the founders of Witness to Love, a really phenomenal mentor-based ministry that really gets couples well connected with other couples and in living life together. When Communio works with an individual local church, the idea is how do we build the interlocking relationships in and through the local church so that a couple at those early stages of marriage, right, the full time, the most frequently occurring time when people get divorces in those first years, okay, and there's all the physical challenges of early parenthood and all of the financial challenges where your income is low relative to the rest of your life. How are we architected in the individual local church to be able to help that young couple grow in a life of holiness? Frequently in local churches, we think in terms of a men's group, a women's group. Ultimately, I don't have a vocation. I tell people when I talk to Catholic audiences, I don't have a vocation to be a man. I have a vocation to be a married man. That's my vocation. And so help me grow in that vocation. And so looking at your average church, what are we doing there? And there's so much more that can and should be done. And my colleague Jimmy Abreu is somewhere there floating around in the back of the room. He works with me and working with in different parts of the country, and I know he would be happy to circle back with any of you if you have questions.
First, I'd like to thank y'all for doing this conference, and hopefully this is the first of many that will be, reconvening. But mine is proactive in that, okay, we got a lot of energy and time, talent, and treasure in the room. What 3 things should we do now?
Yeah, I think, that comment that came up, I think marriage prep is essential. We did it for 28 years, Joe and I, and we used a program called Better and Forever. It was a one-on-one with couples, and you met with them in your home, 5 weeks, over about 5 weeks. We got to know them. They got to know us. They were able to open up to us, and we developed a relationship with them. Many of them, we are still friends with them. So in fact, we've done it for so long and had done it for so long. They have grandchildren. So, gives you an idea of where we are. Their children are marrying, but it's essential in building that relationship where they can call us and feel comfortable. We're struggling, and maybe just one of them saying, we're having a hard time. I don't know what to do. Bringing them together, having dinner together. They ate with us. They came. We had chaos at dinner, whatever was going on, but they saw what it was like to have family, and then to break up and meet and develop those relationships. We need that. I was in a parish once and I said, what are you doing for marriage prep? And I got a shrug. And I thought, oh dear, that's not good. We need marriage prep.
I'll throw in there, not to disagree, there's a ubiquitousness of marriage prep. If you're going to get married in the Catholic world, for instance, you can't do it. No priest that's worth his ordination is going to celebrate, witness the marriage without it. Obviously, I know the desires for great and effective marriage prep, which is what she's saying, and I agree with. And after marriage, there's so little after the wedding day. If you think about your average church, Protestant or Catholic, after the wedding day, there's nothing that exists until there's a problem. Okay. And the question I would ask, I think that was Larry's question. The question is, what do we do? Go to your pastor and ask him, what are we doing right now for marriages? People are already married. What are we doing for them? Okay. Ask the question, if after church on Sunday, if you were to say to somebody that you went to a marriage class last weekend, what would their reaction be? Okay. If you think in hearing this, that if I told you I went to a marriage class last week or a marriage retreat last week, if you hear that and think there might be something wrong with JP's marriage, then we have to own that we are part of this problem, right? That there is a stigma associated with investing in your marriage that people have. Spiritually, if you think about it, if I were to sit on a spiritual retreat last week, nobody would think there's something wrong. I know JPs are, gosh, are you falling, no longer believing in Jesus? No one would say it, but I said I went on a marriage retreat, somebody would conclude, what's going wrong with JP's marriage, right? And we have to make it normative to grow in holiness in this life is to invest in the primary relationship God has given me, and that's with my spouse. And so at the local parish, it needs normative from long after the wedding day until death do you part.
So we've got two answers to Larry's question: high quality marriage prep, and then working with people after the wedding day, which we don't do much of. Mark, Brad?
Just a quick pitch for the marriage course. I think it's the flip side of the Alpha course out of Holy Trinity Brompton, I think it is. We did that when we were Presbyterians a long time ago, and just fabulous, right? Around, they did dinner. You seated for a salad. You have questions to talk about. You watch the video. You seated for main course. You have questions to talk about. Same thing before dessert, and then we did that I think 6 different times. That was great. And then the people who are graduates of it help with it, and I loved helping with that. That's one thing that comes to mind. It's marriage maintenance, really, and that was exceptional. And churches and parishes can do it. It takes some work. It takes some investment, but it was fabulous.
So we can think about this in terms of 3 different domains, basically, broadly speaking, church, education, and the state. And I think one kind of easy way to kind of capture the comments that were made by Cathy and Mark, and obviously JP, is to suggest that everyone who's here at a Protestant or a Catholic church sign up with Communio, and they can kind of take care of a lot of these different dimensions of family formation and marriage support that would be, I think, great for everyone. So moving beyond that sort of church point, I would say when it comes to education, trying to get kind of better kind of love, relationship, family education into Catholic and other private and public schools in the area. Working maybe with the state, for instance, on what's called the success sequence would be kind of one way to do that at the state level here in Texas. And then that beyond the education piece, for kind of just schools, I think too, thinking about, working with local youth groups here, either in your churches or kind of freestanding, to kind of give teenagers, basically an inoculation against what they're seeing on TikTok and Instagram, and you can imagine how that would work. With some compelling young adults leading teenagers on a better path. And the final piece in terms of the state is just to kind of be advocates for public policies tackling things like social media, pornography, and sort of how they're interacting with, especially with our kids, but also obviously adults. And there are bills and legislation that are kind of either pending in Austin or going to be on deck in Austin related to technology. And that's an increasing issue for a lot of teenagers and their parents, myself included. It was just helping our kids navigate the devices. which can be really powerfully negative influences on, family dynamics, and then also their kind of conceptions about what's good and true and ideal for love and sex and marriage. And then at the same level too, just thinking about policies like the child tax credit. This goes to sort of the gentleman's question over here in terms of what we can do to create better context for parents. And there are other kinds of pro-family policies too that you can make to engage with in Austin, just sort of down the road.
Thank you. Yeah. Just to emphasize one of those points, a whole lot of marriages stumble right out of the gate. A whole lot of divorces happen within the first 5 years, which is not to say they don't happen after that. But if we had to pick a place to start with our local pastor, with our local church, zeroing in on what are we doing for couples from wedding day to their 5th anniversary would be a great place to start.
First of all, thank you for your presentations. I'm one of the canon lawyers of the diocese, and when someone comes to us with declaration of nullity, we're having to look at the moment of consent to see whether they truly intended and knew and wanted what marriage is in the eyes of the church. With the societal issues you're looking at, that's one of the questions we're working with and struggling with in the canonical world. How is society influencing their ability to give consent? Do you maybe have any comments on that?
Kevin, could you recapitulate that for me? Just, I want to make sure I understood the question.
Yeah. So Father Millet's asking about reflections on the issue of sort of full consent to what the church understands marriage to be. Is that correct? How societal pressures and forces are affecting people's ability to give full, pulling them in directions other than giving full consent there, even their understanding of what they're doing.
Right. I mean, it strikes me that most of what the church teaches about what the essences of marriage is increasingly divergent from the cultural messaging that people are getting. And so if you have a modest premarital education, right, which I think a ton of people have had, I mean, it's not hard for clinicians to find like, wow, they did not know what they were doing. How did that get through? How did they, So I think it's absolutely pivotal to help people understand what's expected of them. Plus, then they have to kind of butt up against this idea that, okay, yeah, I know the Catholic Church says this, but in reality, like they don't care that much about it, right? There's this formal rule, but, informally everybody ignores it, which is, again, for your sake, you have to push through that as well. And the premarital education can't be unserious about it, right? So I do think about the premarital prep program we talked about a little bit earlier as almost guaranteeing that they can't not know what marriage is about, right? And that kind of thing can have a dramatic difference in the kinds of cases I think that would come before such a commission, or even that probably wouldn't come at all because they would be well formed.
First of all, I want to thank you, Kevin, for putting this together. It's a fabulous presentations of the four presenters, including you, Cathy, with 10 sons and practical experience on a daily basis of what it means to live sacrificial love. The third speaker has written this book on the pursuit of happiness, and not only pursuit of happiness, but the closing of the American heart. The American mind and heart have both been closed. It is inherent in the roots of the cultural formation. Robert Bellah and his colleagues did a masterful study on this in Habits of the Heart, followed up by the Good Society. When we look at the question that was raised by Father Millet, it is true. To what extent can people's hearts be open in the pre-marriage preparation for them to make a consent in which they're going to be there for rich or for poor, sickness and health until death do we part? Those 42 words are absolutely incredible. And what they imply is that both of these people coming together in a spousal relationship are going to live the Paschal mystery. Our task as the church
is to present the love of the Paschal mystery as the only way to happiness. Only way. There is no other way. And that means an ongoing dying to the self. In a culture which puts the self beyond and above the community and a necessity of making any contribution to that community only to the extent that you are going to satisfy your personal interest. Everything that we have heard here today in the data points to the fact that when people go into the marriage, it is a contract and it is not a covenant. And it is a contract which they can break at any time if either of the spouses does not measure up to what they expected in the contract. And the contract is always about how you're going to satisfy me. You, Cathy, and Joe had to struggle with that all the time. Naturally, as you said, you have to look at your own well-being, the well-being of the relationship, and then the contribution to the community. But our task as a church and in the parish, and that's where the rubber hits the road. I am privileged as a priest to sit in the confessional and hear people come to me to talk about the brokenness of their lives. And they are broken. People are looking for someone to give them the vision. John Paul II, in his Novo Millennio Eneunte, which is his first encyclical after the millennium, says in number 43, go and read it. The greatest challenge for the church in the coming millennium is going to be to live the spirituality of Communio. Immediately when you say Communio, you say relationships. And immediately when you say relationships, you have to have love. There are no relationships without love. And then he says, the first reaction is going to be to jump in there and say, which programs can we form? Wrong, he says, wrong. Sorry. What you really have to look at is each other and see a gift. And in the receiving and the giving of the gifts is where the dying rising takes place. I would suggest to you that Pope Francis has a wonderful formula for what we should be doing in a parish. Encountering people. Encountering people. It's the first way we relate. Secondly, not just to encounter, but to accompany. And you're talking about that, Cathy, and what you did at the table and you calling up and so forth. It's very practical. You accompany for what? Here is what I think, I'm sorry, that the center does very well, and that is to learn how to dialogue. Need I say more about our culture? When you have our presidential candidates screaming hate and division, and then we come down into our house and we see hate and division. And finally, why do dialogue? To discern what you're going to do in the marriage to make the sacrifices appropriately. I want to thank you very much. I mean, your research has overwhelmed me here. I don't know about the rest of you. I'll go out of here, my head spinning on it. But to take it all and to focus on one thing. And by the way, today we celebrate the conversion of Paul. Now, there's a guy that thought he had it all together in programs. I mean, he really thought he had it together in programs until he was knocked on his rear end. And then he still couldn't see. Where did he begin to see? Somebody took him by the hand. Somebody else said, Ananias says, come on. You're going to do this. You have the faith. You can be baptized now. I'm sorry, I'm talking too long.
Okay. Thank you, Father Nesty. We've got time for one more question. Go ahead. Did that one die? It was low on battery. Oh, no. Okay. There you go.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your great presentations. I am Ricardo Medina. I'm the Family Life Director here at the diocese. The question, perhaps not for now, but for a follow-up, perhaps conversations, could be if you happen to have some cultural differences on the things you exposed. Here at Houston, we have at least 6 different cultural groups, all of them Catholic, approaching our faith in very different ways. So their understanding of family, marriage, parenting, and so on, they are quite diverse. And I wouldn't dare that any one of them is better than the other. Some things in the Hispanic culture are better. Some things in the Arabic culture are better. So I think that's a golden opportunity for analyzing those differences we have. And if you happen to have information there, I will be thrilled of following up on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, I grew up Irish Italian and then married Joe. His parents were very different with the expectations, and it took a while. It was something that Joe and I had to kind of deal with. He had kind of gone on and went to a Jesuit high school in El Paso and then on to Loyola University in Tulane. But and so he kind of moved away from some of that. But it was a real struggle for me at first. Their expectations of me and of us as a couple were very much on the more, the bigger, and the better. And when Joe chose to stay in academic medicine and wasn't going to go into private practice and make all this big money, I wasn't going to be part of the social circles that I had no, goal to be, any of that. It was a real challenge. They were not extremely accepting of who we were and having this big family. So it can be a real challenge dealing with some of that. Fortunately, Joe and I, could dialogue, as Father would say. We could talk about it, and I could start to learn where he was coming from sometimes, because it was where he grew up and how, his parents dealt with things very differently than my parents. So, yeah, I do think it's and Father, you may remember there was a conference years ago, and it was the first time I was kind of, if you want to say, made aware of how different cultures did things, because there were the Vietnamese and the Spanish, and even within the Latino, some of us, they didn't like us calling it Hispanic and Latino. And so, yeah, I became aware of that.
And just one more point on the sort of ethnic character of not just Houston, but just the country more generally. For folks here, what would you guess is the national origin for couples who have the most stable marriages in America? Most stable marriages in America, the lowest rates of divorce. What sending country who's sending people from their country to the U.S. would qualify there? The Philippines is pretty good, but they're not number one. Not Nigeria? What? India. She's right. Okay. Now, I only mention that just because what we see in the U.S. is that Asian couples tend to have the highest rates of marital stability, although not necessarily the highest rates of marital quality, which maybe there's some combination there, maybe a recognition or a realism. But I would just mention that also in part because in terms of not only just being culturally sensitive to differences and how they're related to marital stability, marital quality, but also to the kind of intergenerational character, at least historically, of many Asian models. And I think in this newer cultural context where it is, as Father was saying, Robert Bello is telling us that expressive individualism that Bello wrote about has become even more pervasive in this current context. So I think having the benefit, if you can, of kind of living closer to kin, to parents, grandparents, siblings, might be even more important today. In a broader context where there's just not as much support for family life, and where the challenges of being like a young mother with lots of little kids can be more readily navigated, when you have kin. So my wife had twins 14 years ago, and her mother and her father moved down from Northern Virginia to Charlottesville, and that sort of was a lifesaver for us. Anyways, the point being that I think kind of understanding that in this moment, kind of some aspects of that kind of more Asian approach to family life might be helpful for us in navigating the new challenges facing us today.
Thanks. And then JP, I see your hand up.
Yeah, it's a great question about the challenges of different cultural backgrounds. And a big thing I would like to note is we are, as humanity, a lot more similar than we're dissimilar. I don't want to discount the fact that there are real cultural differences between folks. So as a ministry, currently, we talk about having a framework that's applied differently in different churches. So the form is the same, the matter is different. So when we've served in communities where we've got parishes now that have large Vietnamese, Burmese, Hispanic, Caribbean, or Hispanic Central American, as we've worked with churches where there's migrant farm community, where it's entirely a migrant farm church, or on the Northern Plains tribes where there's great poverty up in, say, the Crow plantation, the Crow reservation. And what we're seeing is being able to work locally to adapt certain differences within the matter. You can still provide, there's still a deep need to be able to know, trust, rely, commit, these core elements of relational dynamics that my co-author, John Van App, has written a lot about and done a lot of research on. So anyways, I just know that's an important thing. And then back to Father's prior point, I do want to say that Pope Francis's dicastery for Lady, Family, and Life did publish a really great document that was discussed substantially there in the Archdiocese of Houston. Not too long ago, I was blessed to be able to be part of those conversations on how to talk through the marriage catechumenate and this the idea of remote preparation on through a lifetime. That's, as a ministry, that's how we think of serving into into marriage. That this is something that needs to be done long before you think about coupling up, and then continue long after you do so, and helping folks to live in authentic Christian community, to do that well, and to live the virtues of living well, the sacrament.
Thank you, JP. I want to say first, thank you to all of our speakers today. Really appreciate your insight, your research, your wisdom on this. It's been informative and formative for us, and challenging too. And I want to say thank you to all of you. Look, time, as I'm now sort of squarely into middle age, I'm more aware, I think, that time is one of life's most precious gifts, right? We can make more money, we can't make more time. And you have given us your time today. Thank you for that. We are honored by it, and very much grateful for it.